Ron Craig here, discussing with you the way it really is, according to God's written word. Bible truth you may or may not already know. Bible truth you need to know. Bible truth you can know. And Bible truth you can check out with your own Bible. YouTube channel Bible Realities, Lesson 4. The things we see are not always as they appear to be. Whereas some people blame God for everything that happens, including their very own ugly actions, other people, while not denying all guilt, do excuse themselves by claiming the devil made them do it. Although they admit they participated in some atrocity, they attempt to avoid being held accountable for it by claiming it was not really their fault. However, there are those who desire to eliminate both God and the devil from their lives, the obvious goal of all those who hold to the theory of evolution. That lying theory says there is no God and no devil. We humans are our own God and our own devil. There is no such thing as sin and therefore no future judgment. And that is what the human theory of evolution is really all about. Getting rid of the idea of God and His judgment. The devil himself is behind the theory of evolution. That is obvious because that theory serves the purpose of the devil to steal, kill, and destroy. John 10:10. But how can a mere theory have such a devastating effect on people? Well, the devil knows that to question either God's existence or future judgment will cause people to live an ungodly lifestyle which will bring on them that future judgment the theory of evolution denies and even laughs at. But rather than either blaming every earthly event on God, thereby excusing ourselves from any guilt, or attempting to rid ourselves of the concept that God exists and will bring a final judgment upon all guilty parties, let us now consider some Bible events which prove that in every earthly situation you will find that God, Satan, and human beings are involved. Not many people are aware of that Bible truth, the way it really is. The first incident we will consider is in Acts 2:23, which tells us plainly that God, by His foreknowledge of all events and His pre-planning of our redemption, delivered Jesus Christ up to crucifixion. But what most seem to misunderstand about Acts 2:23 is that it does not teach that God was responsible for the actions of those who crucified Jesus. He merely delivered Him up to them. You see, God knows how lost people think and act, as well as what the devil is after. The truth is that God is wise enough to take even the evil plans of human beings and the devil and turn them around and make them serve His plans. Surely you know the devil was the one who provoked the religious leaders to persuade that crowd to pressure Pilate to crucify Jesus. Peter said that it was by lawless hands that Christ had been crucified, and lawless hands could not be the hands of God. It was the hands of the Roman soldiers who obeyed Pilate, who commanded the soldiers to do the bidding of that crowd, who yielded to the instructions of those religious leaders who were provoked by the devil. Christ was the woman's seed whom God had said would crush the serpent's head. So you know the devil was the evil spirit behind the crucifixion of Christ. The devil used the envy of the Jewish religious leaders to appeal to the herd mentality of that religious crowd to pressure Pilate, the governor of Judea, in one final attempt to rid himself of the creator of the universe, who was predestined to render the devil ineffective to all who put their trust in the Lord's sacrifice. So we can see in this historical event the roles of different beings, including God, the devil, and many people. And of course Christ was certainly involved in that event. But what about the roles of each of those personalities? The purpose of this lesson is to reveal that very thing. God had been planning the result of that event from eternity past, so He was not about to allow His salvation plan to be thwarted. Yet Satan had been trying to thwart that divine plan since the day God had pronounced it in the Garden of Eden, Genesis 3:15. But did the devil himself drive those metal spikes into Christ's body? Or did men do it? And who commanded the soldiers to nail Christ's hands and feet to that cross? The devil or a man? And did the devil yell repeatedly, "Crucify him"? Or did the rabble do the yelling? The rabble. In this case, no good folk succeeded at saving Jesus from death on the cross. But his deliverance from the cross was not part of God's plan anyway. He died for our deliverance. God therefore did not want anyone to save Jesus from the crucifixion. But God did use people to achieve his salvation plans. Although Satan used those people in an attempt to defeat God's redemption plan, using Pilate, the Jewish religious leaders, and the unruly crowd, God foiled the devil's purpose, turning their actions around to produce the very opposite. Our next biblical example is found in Acts 16. Paul and his team had planned to carry the gospel into certain cities in Asia, but the Holy Spirit redirected Paul to the region of Macedonia. In Philippi, a chief city of Macedonia, Paul ministered the gospel to a women's prayer group which met out in the open. Then he started a house church in the home of a woman named Lydia. The prayer group still met outside, apparently, and on their way to one of the meetings, a demon-possessed girl began taunting Paul in the gospel. And she continued to do that until Paul cast the taunting demon out of her. She had been a fortune teller who had made much profit for her master's owners. And when that demon went out, so did the profit of those men. And when they found out that Paul had done them that financial disservice, they had Paul and Silas beaten and thrown into jail. About midnight, their backs bleeding from the whipping and their feet shackled, Paul and Silas began to sing praises to God, who answered their spontaneous praise with an earthquake which destroyed the jailhouse and the shackles, but harmed none of the occupants in the jail. The prisoners had heard the praises of Paul and Silas, and obviously the jailer too, because upon seeing the damage of the earthquake, the jailer assumed that the prisoners had all fled, and knowing that Rome would not tolerate jailers allowing any escapes, that jailer planned to take his life. But Paul stopped him, assuring him that all the prisoners were still in their open cells, miracle upon miracles. How do I know that jailer had heard Paul and Silas singing praises to God in their cells, and obviously preaching the gospel to the walls and to whoever might be listening? The man ran in and asked them how he could be saved. The jailer and all of his household got saved that same night. The man took Paul and Silas to his home, fed them, and washed their wounds, and got his own spiritual wounds healed as well. So the church Paul had started added even more members. I'm presenting this portion of Paul's ministry for the purpose of showing that God, Satan, and human beings were all involved in this Bible event. Some of the people were on the good side with God, and some on the evil side with Satan. The Holy Spirit, God, instructed Paul and Silas to go to Macedonia. There he answered their jailhouse praise with an earthquake which damaged their bonds but not their bodies. God was certainly involved in saving Lydia and her family, and the jailer and his family. And some of the other prisoners probably accepted the Christ Paul preached and praised. The devil had that slave girl to taunt Paul, and then provoked her disgruntled owners to have Paul beaten and thrown into jail. That jailer then secured his job by securing Paul and Silas in the stocks. So several humans were involved in that biblical event. Paul and his gospel team obeyed God. Lydia obeyed God by believing what Paul preached. Then her household evidently obeyed the gospel. The fortune teller girl's owners were on Satan's side by forcing that demon-possessed human being to serve their profit motives. Then, when the demon was removed and the girl's powers were gone, they served Satan's purpose once again by falsely accusing Paul and Silas of wrongdoing, and then by having them publicly beaten without a legal trial and thrown into jail. Those magistrates who agreed to the illegal beating and jailing also did the devil's bidding. But the jailer and possibly some of those prisoners were used by both God and the devil in that biblical event. The jailer, right at first, showed precious little sympathy for Paul and Silas, restricting their movements even in the jail cell by putting their feet in stocks. It is likely as well that the jailer had no appreciation for their singing and disturbing the other prisoners. It is even more likely that the other prisoners wanted them to shut up. But when God got openly involved, the jailer for sure, and possibly some of the other inmates, changed their minds about both the God and the gospel Paul and Silas were singing about. In multitudes of Bible events, you will discover that same general pattern. God is always somehow involved, and Satan always tries to get involved, and human beings become caught between the two, some getting on Satan's side and some on God's side. Which side are you on? It is up to you to decide. And that is the way it really is.